The webinar will begin shortly. Greetings everyone, I'm Kevin Morris with the Federal Aviation Administration, and I would like to welcome you to episode 6 of our summer webinar series on operational waivers. Today we're going to cover some actual examples of waiver text that people have submitted. We're going to review some things that are good, some things that are bad, and some things that we may consider kind of an ugly application. But the idea is that we're going to learn from it. So a couple things as we get started here. Number one, we're recording the meeting as we always do, and this recording will be posted to our YouTube channel relatively quickly after we finish up the webinar episode for today. Audio is going to be through your computer speakers. We're using voice over internet protocol today, and as always we have the Q&A pod at the bottom of the screen. That is your key to a room full of FAA experts from legal, air traffic, waiver team, operational specialists, communication, flight standards. They're all there ready to answer your questions. So if you do have a question, please enter it into the Q&A pod at any time during today's webinar, and it will be answered by one of the support specialists. Likewise, toward the end of the episode, we do have our live Q&A session, where if you would like to ask your question live on the air, so to speak, we have allocated plenty of time for that, so you can ask your question then. But let's kind of get into the content here for today. Our goal is to help you understand what works and what doesn't work in an application. We're going to do that by providing actual examples of content submitted in waiver applications. We're going to review that together, and then we're going to apply the concepts that we've learned over the last 5 webinar episodes on operational waivers to that text context that's being put into the waiver application. And then we'll finish up with a review of some key waiver application tips. A little bit on the waiver analysis process first. Whether the application is an outstanding application or is a poor application, we review them as they are received, sort of first in, first out type of thing. So there's a lineup of waivers that are coming in. We take those waivers to the review team as they are received. There is no preferential treatment given for any particular operator, any particular name, any particular company. It's as they come in, that's when we review them, which can be challenging in terms of trying to meet our timeliness goals of getting these to you as quickly as we can, because there are a lot of waivers coming in. So let's look at some of the numbers here in the statistics. These statistics are through July 31st of this year, and it covers the applications that we reviewed. So this does not include the applications that may have been submitted this morning or last week that we haven't had a chance to get to. But roughly we've reviewed 11,300 waiver applications. Now that's in total. That is not specific to any one waiver application submitted. That's all waivers that we've had a chance to look at in totality. What is concerning to us is that 8,700 of the ones that we've reviewed have been disapproved. And that's one of the reasons that we started this summer webinar series, and we focused on operational waivers first, because 8,700 is a big number. And we want that number to go down. If you look at some of the data on the screen, you're going to see that the reason the vast majority of those waivers are disapproved is because there's incomplete information or there is an insufficient safety case. And that's just a fancy way of saying somebody didn't read the waiver application instructions, or somebody didn't read the waiver safety explanation guidelines. And again, those are 2 key documents that you've heard me mention in almost every episode. And that's why, because the vast majority of the problems that we see could be solved by reading those 2 documents. When we're talking about the types of waiver applications that we're getting, here's how they break down. Just over 50% are for daylight waiver, meaning the vast majority of the waiver applications we get are for folks who want to fly at night. Almost 80% of those daylight waiver applications we get are denied, and they're denied for the exact same reasons I just mentioned. Either there's not enough information, they didn't read the waiver application instructions, bad information was put in there, or they didn't satisfy making a safety case in the waiver application. And again, that's what our summer webinar series is devoted to. We want to drive that number down. We do not want that number to be that high. And so what we're trying to give you is all the tools you need as an operator to submit an application that can be either approved or go through a request for information process, but to work towards a successful waiver application for you folks. It's probably a good point here to review a little bit of our waiver policy. Now, we touched on this in episode number 1. I thought it might be a good idea to bring it back here for our episode today. It's important to remember, as outlined in the rule, that the administrator, the FAA, may issue a certificate of waiver. We are not required to. And the other key element is that the burden is on the applicant to show that your operation is going to be safe. It's your responsibility as the waiver applicant to let us know what you're doing, how you're going to do it, the type of equipment that you're going to use. And you've heard me say it before, making no assumptions in your waiver application. Remember, waivers are not guaranteed. It's not an automatic process, as clearly evidenced by some of the numbers I just put up there a couple slides ago. And they're not permanent. They will expire at some point. That point of expiration will depend on the type of waiver application you're seeking, but nonetheless, they are not a forever element. So you will need to go through this process on a somewhat continual basis. For example, if you're doing a daylight waiver, typically those are good for 4 years. So maybe every 4 years you're going to need to go through this process and to make sure your information's up to date. This is the process, and I want to clarify a couple things. This slide comes straight out of our episode number 1 where we talked about where's my waiver. This is our process that we follow. The key element is that you still need to submit your application. We recommend it 90 days in advance. That doesn't mean it's going to take 90 days to approve, but it gives us enough time to review your application. At the very bottom of the screen, I've had a lot of people focus on that text. Intake through review signature averages about 30 days depending on complexity. That 30-day average applies to operational waivers. And if you really want a specific answer drilling down into that, we're really talking about non-complex daylight waivers. So you're sort of run-of-the-mill, I want to fly at night, I'm putting together my safety case with risk mitigations, here's my applications. Typically, those take on average about 30 days to process. Now that I've said that, as your waiver becomes more complex, even if it's a daylight waiver application, or if you're applying for a more complex rule beyond visual line of sight, which we're going to cover in our next episode, that timeline also increases, which is why we ask that you submit your application 90 days in advance. So let's get into the meat of today's content. We're going to take a look at some waiver applications, specifically the text people have put in those waiver applications. We're going to look at 2 examples that are good, 2 examples that are not so good, and 2 examples that they don't even come close to making the mark. So the good, the bad, and the ugly coming up. What we want to do is identify why the text in that particular application worked. Keep in mind, simply copying the text that you're about to see on the screen is not going to guarantee you an application that is going to be approved. You need to make that application individualistic. But what we hope to do is provide you with some key takeaways for each one, so you know, why did it work? Why did it not work? And that information will be very useful to you in your waiver applications. So let's start with a couple of good ones right off the bat. That's a good way to start. So this is for a daylight waiver, and this wasn't the entire text of the waiver application, obviously, but part of the text stated, crew members not next to the remote pilot in command will use non-aviation frequency two-way radio devices to ensure communications. So let's dive into that a little bit more. Why do we consider that a good statement in your waiver application? Well, for a couple reasons. Here's why it works. We identify equipment used, a non-aviation frequency two-way device. That's very specific as to what you intend to use. And it also details how the remote pilot in command will stay informed during the operation from the visual observers, perhaps, or other crew members that are using these devices. And then they add the statement of not next to the remote pilot in command. So anybody who's not next to the remote pilot in command, essentially can't turn and talk to them, will have this device and communicate with the remote pilot. It's a very detailed, very specific, making no assumption type statement in that application. So the takeaway from a statement like that is that the remainder of this person's application followed that same level of detail. So it was consistent throughout the application. They made no assumptions as to what they were doing or how they were going to do it. They didn't have the FAA analyst looking at it and saying, well, I don't understand what they're talking about with this particular system. They clearly identified everything they were doing, and they identified how they were going to mitigate the risk in that operation. So let's look at another good one. This is for another daylight waiver application, 107.29. This applicant stated the small unmanned aircraft is equipped with a, and then they listed the manufacturer and model of lighting, is equipped with a white strobe with a tested night visibility of 8 miles and has a blink rate of once per second. So again, why does this work? Because it was very specific as to the equipment being used. The FAA analyst who's reviewing that waiver application knew exactly the make and model of equipment in terms of lighting that was going to be on that UAS. Further, it detailed how that equipment functions. This case, it was a white blinking strobe. Others have been, I've got red lights on the front or back, or green lights on the front, or vice versa, or blue lights or yellow lights, and then they detail how they're going to use that lighting information. Again, very detailed information. Then they go on to state that it's been tested to a visibility of 8 miles. We like this because it directly addresses a waiver safety explanation guideline question. Now, they didn't just state that it's been tested to a visibility of 8 miles. They actually provided the documentation that goes with it. So it was the applicant providing the statement of answering the waiver safety explanation guideline, which we request that it be visible for at least 3 miles. They said 8, and then they provided documentation that showed how those lights have been tested for a visibility of 8 miles. So what do we want to take away from this one? Clearly, the application covered the waiver safety explanation guideline questions, and it provided answers to each one. The answers were, again, detailed. They made no assumptions. They clearly justified the safety case and the risk mitigations the operator is going to impose to ensure a very good level of safety. The rest of the application on this particular one was fairly lengthy. So what the applicant did was they included bookmarks as to where this information was located in their application. So, for example, they identified exactly in each waiver safety explanation guideline question where the FAA analyst could find that information in their application. That really helped speed up the process and really help the analysis portion of it. So those are a couple of good examples. Let's transition into some examples that maybe aren't so good. And it might not be obvious at first why this answer is not so good, but we have a lot of submissions that are like what you're seeing on the screen here. This was for an operation where they were requesting to go beyond visual line of sight. So they're requesting a waiver to 107.31. They state in their application, I will use an advanced system with video feeds to keep track of the UAS without actually seeing it. Okay, that sounds pretty good, but here are some of the problems of why it doesn't really work. Advanced systems. We don't know what those are because advanced systems is a subjective term that can mean really anything from an applicant, and it can really mean anything to an analyst. So what advanced system are you using to keep track of the UAS? And furthermore, how does it work? If you folks saw the episode Risky Business or Just the Facts previously that we did, one of the big issues I pointed out was the what versus the how. A lot of folks either get the what or sometimes they forget the what, but we don't see a lot of the how does it work? How is that system going to help you in the process of operating beyond visual line of sight? And they say, I'm going to keep track of the UAS, which is obviously important when you're operating beyond visual line of sight, but this particular application didn't then cover how are they going to detect and avoid other aircraft? How are they going to yield right of way to comply with the rule when operating beyond visual line of sight? So while some of the information was okay, most of it was too vague and made too many assumptions. And that's the real problem here, is that they're making a lot of assumptions about advanced systems and keeping track of the UAS without seeing it. One of the key elements with going beyond visual line of sight, we're going to cover this again in episode number 7, is that sometimes, depending on your operation, you will need an FCC grant of equipment authorization to operate. We're talking about frequency spectrum issues. And operating beyond visual line of sight is a very technical waiver when you get into that. This particular applicant didn't address any of those waiver safety explanation guideline questions. So remember, I talked about this in the previous slide, when you're increasing the risk or the complexity of your waiver request, it gets more and more difficult for us to review your waiver when you're making a lot of assumptions. So be very, very specific in there. We'll take a look at another bad one here. This applicant for a daylight waiver wanting to fly at night states, the drone has lights attached to it which can be seen for miles, so the aircraft will be visible at night. Well, I'm already assuming some of you guys have figured this out, why this doesn't work. Lights attached to it. Okay, what kind of lighting do you have attached to it? How are those lights going to be used? Are they a strobe lighting system? Is it a different color illuminated lighting system on that? And the statement can be seen for miles is far too vague. We, of course, require to be identified for at least 3 miles, but we don't know what miles mean. Is that 2 miles, 10, 20 miles? We don't know. Again, we have to be specific in our waiver applications. When you're submitting your information, be very clear on what you're using and how you're going to use it. Avoid vague terms like has lights attached to it or it can be seen for miles. Make sure we talk about the how the system works in addition to the what. Okay, couple of good ones, couple of bad ones. Let's get into some ones that really aren't that pretty. This was for an applicant who wanted to conduct operations over people, requesting a waiver to 107.39. They state in their application, I've flown over people for marketing purposes before, and I'll make sure to let them know it's happening again. So, first question one of the analysts would have would be, you've flown over people before? So you're applying for a waiver that you don't have, and you're already doing what your waiver is going to allow you to do? If you've flown over people before, was it under an exemption? Was it under a public aircraft type operation? Where is that experience coming from? How have you flown over people before? And a lot of applicants will put in, I'm going to make people aware that my drone is flying. I'm going to post signs. I'll put notices up to make sure that everybody knows it's happening. That's okay. That's one part of the mitigation process in terms of your application, but it's just one part. Tacking a sign up saying there's a drone flying overhead, watch out, is not a complete safety mitigation, specifically in terms of operating over people. We need to know things about the reliability. How reliable are the components on your aircraft? How reliable is your UAS, the system in itself, the whole, the software, the computer technology that you're using? Has the small unmanned aircraft been tested for injury to humans? If so, we would like to see that testing data to help us understand the risk mitigations you're incorporating. Remember, ops over people is a complex, higher risk waiver, so you really need to read through the waiver safety explanation guidelines as you move into these complex waiver. Operating over people also requires very specific unmanned aircraft information that you provide to us, and that's important. Remember, the burden is on the applicant. It's not our job to go find out what you're talking about. In your application, you need to let us know, this is what I'm using, here's the reliability, so on and so forth. The burden is on the applicant. Okay, one other one that's really not so pretty. I've talked a lot about how we're taking small excerpts from waiver applications for the text. This particular waiver application, that was the only text in the entire document. And if you remember, we have to review these documents as they come in. We can't simply take a look at it and say, that's a bad one, I'm not even going to deal with it, toss it aside, I'll figure it out later. We have to review these. We have to analyze them as they come in. So this applicant, in the entirety of the application, only stated that text on your screen. I'm doing this just for fun and will remain below the treetops. That was it. We had to review it. Again, why doesn't it work? Well, I'm doing this just for fun does not make a safety case. Obviously, that doesn't make a safety case. It certainly doesn't provide a risk assessment either. What the applicant put next, talking about remaining below the treetops, we see a lot of that. I'm going to remain below the light posts. I'll remain below the antennas. I'll remain below the trees or the rooftops or the building tops. That doesn't really let us know how high you intend to fly. Trees, light posts, antennas, buildings, all vary in height. So simply saying, I'm going to stay below the tops of all the buildings in this area is not really a safety mitigation because, yeah, most aircraft probably aren't going to be operating in that area, but some aircraft could be. It could be an aerial applicator. It could be an emergency helicopter coming in and out. So we really need more specificity in your application than simply, I'm going to stay below the treetops. So the key takeaways, in particular with this applicant, start over. Go through the waiver safety explanation guidelines. Go through the waiver application instructions. quite honestly, watch our summer webinar series. It's designed in part to help drive down those numbers of disapproved waiver applications that we're seeing far too many of. And remember, watching one episode is great. Watching a couple is even better. But the entire summer webinar series, episodes 1 through 9, are meant to be watched in their entirety, so you have a full understanding of what we expect. So I want to remind you guys about the waiver safety explanation guidelines again. You've heard me say it over and over again, but that's really your starting point in your waiver application for many reasons that you see on the screen right now. It's your key to start your risk mitigation in your application when you submit it to us. Typically speaking, those folks that follow the waiver safety explanation guidelines and provide detailed examples without making assumptions usually get approved, or at the very least, we send them a request for more information. It's when we're missing all that information that the applications go back as denied. Remember what we're trying to do here too at the FAA. We want to ensure that when you're flying, you're doing it safely at all times. So we need you to tell us how you're going to do that. We need you to tell us not only that, but if something strange happens or if there's unique circumstances particular to your operation, how you're going to handle that, how you're going to mitigate or reduce that risk in your operation. And lastly, with these waiver safety explanation guidelines, they are a great place to start, but they're not the end of the road for most people. Most people's operation have very unique elements to it or specific type of operational environments that they're going to be in, where the waiver safety explanation guidelines get them on the right path, but we need more information from you beyond that. So don't just stop when you get done with the waiver safety explanation guidelines. Really take a look at your operation and provide us with that full detail. Again, don't make assumptions in your application. Be very specific and be very clear on the information. So the top 3 tips to take away from today's episode here: answer the waiver safety explanation guidelines, be detailed, be clear, don't make assumptions in it, follow the waiver application instructions. Again, the vast majority of our applications that are disapproved are because the top tips 1 and 2 were not followed. And make sure you provide a complete risk assessment in your application. Those 3 steps will help you out immensely on your road to receiving a successful waiver from the FAA. So where can you get further information beyond? Typical website that we have is very, very good for information. You see it on the screen there. Drone Zone Documents. Drone Zone is the portal that you use to get access to your waiver application. It's also got a lot of information that will steer you to the correct process for applying for your waiver. Our waiver series website here that we're doing, you can see the website on the screen there. We post every video to that website. Every question that gets asked in the Q&A pod that you guys have been submitting throughout this entire episode today will be posted online. So all the FAQs are put on there as well. So those 3 stops will really provide you with significant amount of information to help you in that waiver application process so that your application will be one of the good ones and receive the approval. So that wraps up our episode for today. For the content portion of it, as normal, we're going to take a short little break and move on to the live Q&A portion following here. So I'm glad you were able to join us. Please stick with us here for about the next minute while we take a short break and we'll go to the live Q&A. During this time, remember that the Q&A pod will remain active. Our experts are still in the room answering your questions. So if you have a question during this short break, please make sure you submit it in the Q&A pod. And thank you for attending. We will be back shortly.